Hey y'all, I'm Mona.
And I'm Andrew.
And we're your hosts today for the Candlelight Christmas Eve online.
Whether this is your first time seeing something from our church,
or you joined with a wise man back in the day,
we've got an amazing service planned for you.
Because we're all gathered in different places, we'd love to hear where you are and who you're with. Drop a comment below on how you're celebrating Christmas Eve.
Bonus points if you comment with a GIF.
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 Are we doing this right now?
When no tensions have been high in 2020, GIF. But we hope this time brings us together to celebrate what truly matters. The birth of Jesus.
Oh, I think you meant Jesus.
Yeah, I totally meant Jesus. Can we edit that?
Yeah, that's embarrassing.
Well, maybe now it's just time for some Christmas music.
So hold on to your scarves and stockings because you are going to love what we've got lined up for you.
Enjoy.
Come and be For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace.
God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a city of Galilee, to a virgin engaged to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David's house. The virgin's name is Mary. The angel said, "Don't be afraid, Mary. God is honoring you. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you will name him Jesus."
In those days, Caesar Augustus declared that everyone throughout the empire should be enrolled in the tax lists. Everyone went to their own cities to be enrolled.
Since Joseph belonged to David's house and family line, he went up from the city of Nazareth in Galilee to David's city called Bethlehem in Judea. He went to be enrolled together with Mary, who was promised to him in marriage and who was pregnant.
While they were there, the time came for Mary to have her baby. She gave birth to her firstborn child, a son, wrapped him snugly and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the guest room.
During the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him."
Nearby, shepherds were living in the fields, guarding their sheep at night. The Lord's angels stood before them. The Lord's glory shone around them, and they were terrified. The angel said, "Do not be afraid. Look, I bring good news to you, wonderful, joyous news for all people. Your Savior is born today in David's city. He is the Christ the Lord. This is a sign for you. You will find a newborn baby wrapped snugly and lying in a manger."
They went quickly and found Mary and Joseph and the baby lying in the manger. When they saw this, they reported what they'd been told about this child. Everyone who heard it was amazed at what the shepherds told them. Mary committed these things to memory and considered them carefully.
The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him.
But those who did welcome him, those who believed in his name, he authorized to become God's children, born not from blood nor from human desire or passion, but born from God. The Word became flesh and made his home among us. We have seen his glory, glory like that of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth.
Merry Christmas, everyone. Welcome to the Abel Residence. My name is Chris Abel, and I'm one of the pastors at First United Methodist Church in Blue Springs. I've got myself a little cider here. Hits the spot. But I'm so glad that you could take some time to join us, and I hope that you're having a wonderful Christmas despite the circumstances of the pandemic. I hope that this time of year is a time for you to go a little deeper, to think about life in a different way, to contemplate the things that really matter. I know that I'm being challenged to do that, and I have some friends of mine that were challenged to do that in the last few weeks. My wife Beth, her best friend, got married a couple weekends ago, and she had always wanted a Christmas wedding. And so they got engaged over a year ago. They were excited about this chance to get married near Christmas and have this themed wedding. And then the pandemic hit and changed everything for them. And so in the time since, they had to adapt on so many levels. They had to decrease the size of their wedding. They had to find different venues that would be available for them. They had to figure out how to space people out and figure out the virtual side of things. I mean, it was quite a haul. And behind the scenes, we got to see like the stresses and the anxieties and the challenges and the people who weren't at their best, and the prayers that were put up in the midst of this. And I could see this path forming. On the one hand, it would be so easy to choose to be bitter and sad and self-pitying and focus on how things went differently than you anticipated. On the other hand, there's the challenge and the possibility of focusing on the beauty and the commitment and the love and the people coming together and the safety of those you love and care about. And it made me realize that it's so easy to make the decision when you're on the outside, when you're looking in. Oh, I got an interruption here. This is Reese's. Yes. Yep. Thank you. I'm so glad that you're excited about Christmas. Okay. And he's on his way. Go to mama. There you go. And here's what I realized. When you're at the fork in the road, it's super easy to know the right answer when you're on the outside, when you're not the one having to make that decision. All of us would understand. It doesn't matter what kind of decisions or beliefs that we have. All of us know you should focus on the good stuff. But we only think that when we're on the outside. When it's us making that decision, it's super challenging. When we're in the midst of it, it's so easy to focus on how things are going wrong and who has sabotaged us and who has an issue and who's bringing drama and what's happening and feeling sorry for yourself. And then it doesn't matter how beautiful the moment might be and how good the moment might be and whatever environment we might be going into, it's so easy to focus on the other stuff. You know, when we come to that fork in the road about seeing the worst or the best, most of us, when we're in that moment, don't choose the best. And the same can be true of Christmas. A lot of us have expectations about Christmas, about how it's supposed to be, about who's supposed to be here and what's supposed to happen and how good it's supposed to be. And then life happens, and it can feel like all we can see is how things have fallen short of what we hoped for. I think it's interesting then that when it comes to Christmas movies and books and stories, over and over there's narratives about how kids can see the fork in the road and see the light a lot easier than adults can. And I think there's a reason for that. I think life kind of beats you up a little bit. I think we grow calluses. We start focusing on the stuff that we shouldn't focus on. But kids understand what Christmas is about. They can easily see the light in the darkness. And when I think about that reality, it reminds me of a Christmas that I had years ago. And I was maybe an elementary or middle school kid, and it was this terrible time in my family's life. My dad had kind of opted out of the whole family thing. My mom was doing her best to take care of these two rascal boys, and we had moved across the country, and she was trying to find make a living to support us. And it was a tough year. It just looked like Christmas was going to be not quite what we hoped for. And I think it was either Christmas morning or Christmas Eve. I remember having this moment. I could really remember this moment where I was starting to go down the path of feeling bad for myself, feeling despair, feeling some anger. And eventually that stuff really compiled in my life. I was a pretty angry teenager. But at this point, on this particular day, that kid didn't choose that path. He chose to see a different path, to see hope, to try to make some light in the darkness. And so that kid went and grabbed his younger brother and grabbed a saw out of their grandfather's tool shed and went down to a public school called Ian White Elementary School. but they had this huge hill with lots of forest trees on it. We went and found a Christmas tree. And then, I still don't know to this day if this was illegal or not, but we just took one of the trees from the public school property and then brought it home. And you might be thinking, well, how'd you get a Christmas tree home? Well, we just dragged it up the street. It was probably about half a mile, and I remember seeing people kind of looking out their curtains and windows at us and being a little confused about what was happening with these two kids dragging a tree through the street. And we got it home and set it up. And when we cut it down, I have this memory of being one of the most beautiful Christmas trees I've ever seen. It was 100 feet tall. It shimmered in the light, and yet when we put it up, about 80% of the needles have fallen off on the journey. It had branches broken. It was lopsided. It didn't quite look like we had hoped, and yet it didn't stop us. We went and found a mount and put a base on it, and found some old lights and strung them up, and we made a Christmas tree. We made it happen. Thank you to the education department for your generous donation. And that Christmas, while probably the worst Christmas we ever, is the one that I cherish the most, because that kid could see the light. And what's funny is, just a few decades later, it's harder to see the light. And for you, maybe you're a teenager, maybe you're middle-aged, maybe you're a mature adult, and we can all understand how easy it is to stop seeing the light. That's why I so love the Christmas story. Not just because it's a story about how God loved us and sent us his son, but I love it because of the side characters, particularly Mary and Joseph. See, Mary and Joseph are this young couple, not even married yet, and there's a story about how people disappointed them. In the middle of the Christmas story, and we skip it every year, but there's a story there about disappointment, and there's a story there about frustration. And it comes at the very beginning of the story, when Mary and Joseph are on their way to Bethlehem. And they're on their way to Joseph's hometown to be counted in a census that the Roman emperor decided that he wanted to happen. And the Bible passage actually says, since Joseph belonged to David's house and family line, and David is this king from 1,000 years before that was the greatest king who ever lived, and he happened to be descended from David in this little town called Bethlehem. And so it says he went to be enrolled in this census with Mary, his fiance, and while they were there, the time came for Mary to have her baby, and she gave birth to her firstborn child, and she wrapped him snugly and laid him in a manger, because there's no place for them in the, one translation says inn, but other translations say guest room. And I want to focus on that for a second, because there were no inns in first century Bethlehem. There's no Motel 6, there's no Hyatt, there's no place where you would just rent a room and then, I guess, give birth. For them, they would have been looking for the generosity of extended family members. Joseph was heading back to his home. The guest room was literally the guest room. It wasn't an inn. And so Mary and Joseph, pregnant and almost married, they went into Bethlehem expecting to rely on the generosity of their extended family. And I wonder how many doors that Joseph had to knock on to be rejected. I wonder how many times he told their story and somebody shut the door in their face. I wonder what people were saying as soon as they closed the door. Be like, can you believe that she is pregnant already? And they wanted to give birth in our house. Oh, they wanted to eat our food. Or, we only have enough firewood for ourselves. I wonder what the narrative was that those people told themselves when they refused this young couple, obviously very pregnant, from staying in their home. The entire village said no. Can you imagine the look on Mary's face when she realized that the only place that they had left was this stable? When the stable was the option? Can you imagine what that would feel like to have your family reject you in this moment of need? Can you imagine how frustrated and angry Joseph might have been? How embarrassed he was that he couldn't provide for this girl? How ashamed she must have been in that moment when she realized that she had just given birth to the Son of God and then didn't have any appropriate place to put him? I mean, a manger is a feeding trough. She put him where the animals ate their food out of. That's the spot, that's what they had available. You know, we tell this story and talk about how sweet it was, but for them, I imagine that at least if I went back, it would have been this weird hybrid of anger and shame and frustration and self-pity. This is a really sad story about how disappointing people can be. Think about that as a Christmas story. To have people who are so selfish that they just ignore you in your plight and in your need and make it all about themselves. And somehow that feels very 2020. And somehow that feels very appropriate for this year. But the story doesn't stop there. No, God actually shows up shortly after to these shepherds. And I wonder if the motive here is like, oh, poor Mary and Joseph. Boy, people can stink sometimes. I can't let them not have anybody there to celebrate this beautiful moment. And so he sends angels to these shepherds out in the fields, which I love that it's these other people who aren't in the homes. It's these other people who are out in the dark, out in the wilderness. And they're invited to come celebrate this moment. And they show up, and I can't decide whether or not I think that Mary and Joseph were just surprised and kind of wanted their privacy, but still let them in, or if they were just starved for anybody or any human beings that actually cared about them. If it was a moment of like, oh my gosh, God has provided again. All of these people we thought would show up didn't show up. And then yet these weird shepherd guys, these guys on the fringes show up, and we're so grateful that we get to celebrate with them. They had this choice like any of us, to look at these two paths, to choose the bitterness and the frustration and the anger at people disappointing them about their situation that was completely out of their control, or to focus on the people who did show up, to focus on the goodness that was happening, to focus on the fact that they did find shelter, which was, by the way, probably a cave, not even a nice stable like we can think of today. And yet, Mary and Joseph had to make a choice too, like any of us, to focus on which path. And to be in that moment, I don't think would have been that easy. And yet the Bible says something really fascinating. It says this. It says that Mary committed these things to memory and considered them carefully. That she just observed and took it in and felt what she needed to feel. But then kind of realized that this was an important moment, nevertheless. And I love that this young gal had the wisdom to not make a snap judgment about what was happening in front of her, but to see the bigger picture. You know, it's so fascinating because the Christmas story is really not necessarily a story about how everything goes right, but how about how everything goes wrong, about people's selfishness, about people not caring, about things not going as you hoped and planned, about people's judgments about your family situation. Like, that's the Christmas story. And yet God still shows up, and Christ is still born. And that baby grew up to be raised by these parents who understood what rejection felt like, who understood how to focus on what was right in the wrongness, who understood how to see light in the darkness. And friends, Christmas isn't about everything going right. It's not about getting the gifts you want. It's not about just being happy. The Christmas story is about being disappointed and yet still finding God in the midst of it. And I don't think I've ever experienced a Christmas that so made me appreciate the Christmas story. And look, friends, I want to be honest with you for a second, because there's going to be something that disappoints you this Christmas. You're going to get frustrated with someone in your family. You're going to feel sorry. You're going to feel sad. You're going to realize what's been taken from you. You might be absolutely frustrated with people who have caused this scenario or in a situation. You might be looking to blame someone. You might not be at your best. And that's the Christmas story. We get to choose between shut doors and shepherds, between focusing on what's wrong and what's right. And Jesus invited us to focus on the shepherds. Look, I don't know what your Christmas has looked like so far. I don't know what this season is like for you. But I do know this, that God has this tendency of moving in ways that we never anticipate or expect. That the things that might seem like they're at their worst might be the beginnings of something beautiful. That we can feel so sorry for ourselves and completely miss out on the amazing things happening around us. And that if this year's taught me anything, it's that the things that limit us don't limit God. I don't know what disappointments you're facing or how things have gone right or haven't gone right, but I know that God still shows up in the darkness. And in fact, some of the most beautiful things happened outside of our comfort zones and outside of our expectations. And so this Christmas, may you experience the true Christmas story. A story about God showing up outside of shut doors with some shepherds out in the fields, with people you never expected showing up and celebrating the start of something good and true and beautiful. And by the way, the wedding was great and our friends were so happy. And ironically, it turns out having a wedding in a stable is a little closer to Christmas than they probably ever imagined. May you see the true Christmas story around you this season. Merry Christmas, friends.
We're all familiar with the fear that comes with a visit to the hospital. Maybe it was the fever that made you realize you needed professional help. Maybe it was the birth of your child. Maybe it was a procedure you've been dreading. But more than likely, you got in the car and drove where you could get the help you needed. Now imagine that same life circumstance if you had to walk. Maybe it's not so hard to imagine if it was half a mile or even a mile. But what if you needed medical care and the nearest doctor or hospital was 50 or 100 miles away? And the only way you had to get there was your feet. This isn't just a hypothetical. It's the stark reality of many of our brothers and sisters in rural Mozambique. That's why this Christmas, 100% of what we collect for our Christmas Eve offering will go to provide a mobile health clinic in Mozambique. Mobile health clinics are changing the face of medical care, especially in developing countries where transportation becomes a huge limitation in getting people the care they need. Your gift will further the reach and impact of medical treatment from the Chikwe Hospital and the Center of Hope in central Mozambique. With only 2 vehicles in their fleet, they've been able to treat nearly 2,000 people for diseases, provide eyeglasses for children and adults, and educate thousands more about their health. The baby Jesus we celebrate at Christmas grew up to say, "Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." So we invite you to partner with us to make this Christmas make a real difference. Find out how you can participate at bluespringsumc.org/give.
So this Christmas, you and I have the chance to make an impact that will last a lifetime and maybe even save some lives too.
And there's a few ways to give that are detailed on our website at bluespringsumc.org/give. You can mail a gift in, drop it by our office, or simply text any amount to 806-256-4244.
And again, 100% of what you share today will go toward a mobile health clinic that will provide medical care for people in rural Mozambique. That number again is 806-256-4244.
But now is the candlelighting part of our Candlelight Christmas Eve service.
Knowing that Christ is the light of the world, we have a chance now to remember this by lighting a candle.
This is my favorite part of Christmas Eve.
Mine too!
Instead of watching Mona light all of those candles, now's your opportunity to grab your candle at home and light it with us.
So what if you have like a Santa gnome and the hat comes off and the candles are in the inside?
Santa gnome can definitely join us.
What if there's like this cool ornament thing and it's got a candle in it? Will that work for them?
I think ornament and candle is like the best thing ever.
Okay. What about this cool centerpiece that looks great on the Christmas table?
If you want to put it on the table, I think that's awesome.
Okay, what about the family who has like 7 people in their house right now and each person could have their own wick?
Even if the one person wants to light 7 different wicks, we would love it.
I'm claiming this one for me.
Hold your horses, Buddy the Elf. You'll know when to light your candle during the song.
So, dim your lights, grab that candle, and prepare to light it when you see the candles being lit on your screen.
So let's head outside and join our musicians as we sing Silent Night.
Well, in true 2020 fashion, our candles are not working. It's just a little too windy out here. Some of us have been out here for hours and we're freezing, but we are still so glad to be hanging out with you. This is that time in the service that we're just going to invite you to go ahead and light whatever candle you have. It might be an app on your phone. It might be that big white barn candle you have sitting on your end table. But at this time, if you want to light your candles with us and sing. Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright, round yon virgin mother and child, holy infant so tender and mild, sleep in heavenly peace, sleep in heavenly peace. Silent night, holy night, shepherds quake at the sight, glory stream from heaven afar, heavenly hosts sing hallelujah, Christ the Savior is born, Christ the Savior is born. Silent night, holy night, Son of God, love's pure light, radiant beams from thy holy face, with the dawn of redeeming grace.
friends, you've got your candle in front of you, and we wish we were holding ours. But the true narrative and the true symbolism of holding that candle is not that it's the flame or the candle or the service or the church service that makes Christmas happen. No, it was the light that came into the world 2,000 years ago. The light that showed up in Jesus. And what we believe as Christ followers is that light didn't end back then, but that Jesus so believed in us and so entrusted us that he shared his light with us. And that spread over through 12 disciples and then out to 100-something folks in the first century, and then to billions and billions throughout the last 2,000 years of people who are carrying that light through all sorts of different seasons of darkness and pain. And now you and I have the great honor and responsibility of being those bearers of light. Christ is still working today and still showing up today. And so I hope this Christmas that you feel that hope and that love through Christ. And so, friends, thanks so much for joining us today. I hope that you'll stick around. We've got some more music planned for you. So turn up your speakers, enjoy these songs, and sing along as we wrap up this service. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you in the new year. Merry Christmas.